Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be exploring the connection between art and spirituality.
Yeah.
We've got some really cool sources to work with today.
Yeah, it should be fun.
We've got academic papers, quotes from artists, philosophers, and even a royal perspective from Queen Elizabeth II. So really going to try to give you like a broad look at this whole idea of, how art has become such a force for finding meaning and connection, especially in the modern world.
Yeah, it's such a rich topic, and it's something that seems to resonate with a lot of people today,
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at how art can be seen as a way to express spiritual ideas, and even maybe how it can kind of act as a substitute for religion for some folks.
Okay, so let's start with this idea that there's kind of this like spiritual void in modern life.
Yeah.
Queen Elizabeth II said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that like most people, have a sense of the spiritual regardless of what they believe.
Right.
But it's almost like the pace of modern life kind of pushes that yearning down, Have you noticed that at all, like in your own life?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we see this reflected in some of the source material too, like the artist Joseph Barries.
Mm-hmm.
He once said that he saw his art as a way to hold on to like these older spiritual, ways of knowing.
Yeah.
And there's almost a sense of urgency in his work,
And there's this quote from the philosopher Eric Voegelin that really struck me.
Okay.
He said, "When the gods are expelled from the cosmos, the world they have left becomes boring."
Right.
It's like we've traded a sense of wonder for just this existential boredom.
Yeah. And that's where I think art kind of steps in. The philosopher Richard Schusterman argues that art has become this superior substitute for religion for a lot of people,
Okay.
giving them a way to connect with something bigger than themselves in a world that's increasingly secular.
So are we saying that people are turning to art to find like meaning and purpose in the same way that maybe people used to find that in traditional religion?
Yeah, in a way, I think so. But it's important to remember that spirituality itself is a very complex concept.
Yeah.
Anthony J. Palmer in one of our sources points out that there's not really one agreed upon definition of spirituality.
Right.
It often overlaps with religious ideas, and that can make it really hard to define.
So maybe instead of getting hung up on definitions, we can think of spirituality as this like desire, that deep human desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
And to see how art can help us do that.
Exactly. And one of the ways we see this play out historically is in the connection between abstract art and those esoteric movements like theosophy.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yep.
We've got 16 Ringbaum's analysis of Wassily Kandinsky,
Right.
who saw art as like this spiritual force that could kind of like transcend the material world.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just Kandinsky, Piet Mondrian, famous for those geometric paintings. He was imbibed with theosophy as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because for a long time, the influence of esotericism on modern art was really downplayed, even like dismissed in academia.
Mm-hmm.
But thanks to scholars like Linda Dalrymple Henderson,
Yeah.
we're starting to see a more, I think, balanced view of how these movements really shaped artistic expression.
So we're kind of moving away from just seeing art as purely aesthetic and starting to recognize its potential for spiritual exploration.
Exactly. And that leads us to another really fascinating idea.
Okay.
The artist as a modern-day shaman.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Dawn Whitehand, she draws a parallel between artists and shamans, right?
Okay.
Seeing them both as these kind of intermediaries between the everyday world and the sacred.
Interesting.
She argues that spirituality and art can really challenge the status quo and push boundaries.
So art, almost like a tool for social commentary,
Exactly.
through its spiritual side, even maybe change.
Absolutely.
Wow.
She also points out that there's often a lot of suspicion around the word spiritual, particularly in academic circles.
Okay.
And she links this to, the historical suppression of paganism and goddess-focused religions.
Right.
By those patriarchal monotheistic religions.
Yeah.
It kind of adds another layer of complexity to the conversation.
Yeah. It's amazing how much depth there is to this. But speaking of challenging the status quo, we have to talk about reenchantment, this idea of bringing back a sense of wonder to life.
Yeah.
To kind of counter that emptiness of modern life.
This is a really key theme in David Tacey's work.
Okay.
He sees the spiritual revolution as this movement towards reconnecting with a deeper, more primal source. It's about finding awe and wonder in a world that often feels very sterile.
So are we talking about like a yearning for something beyond just the rational and scientific something more than just the material world?
Yeah, I think so. And Michael Tucker, he explores this further in his work on the shamanic spirit in 20th century art.
Interesting.
He draws on the work of mythologists like Mircea Eliade and Joseph Campbell.
Oh, wow.
And he sees myth and symbolism, which are often tied to spirituality as a way to broaden our understanding of what it means to be human, connecting us to something larger than ourselves.
This is all so thought-provoking.
Yeah.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
But before we get too far, I wanted to dive into some specifics.
Okay.
Specifically, the use of alchemy in art.
Right.
Especially in the Surrealist movement.
Ah, yes. Alchemy.
Yeah.
With its rich symbolism and its focus on transformation. It's always attracted artists who want to explore the mysteries of the human mind and the nature of reality itself.
And we have some pretty intriguing insights in our sources about the Palatina Library in Prague.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like this treasure trove of alchemical knowledge that fascinated artists like Michael Mayer.
Gaston Bachelard, he viewed alchemy as this kind of fireside reverie.
Okay.
A way of projecting our desires onto matter itself.
Interesting.
He saw it as a metaphor for creativity, transforming something ordinary into something precious and meaningful.
Which connects so beautifully with Stefan Mallarmé's idea that where there is symbol, there is creation.
Exactly.
It's like symbols become these building blocks of a spiritual language that artists use to express these deeper truths. Right. And Thomas Mann also saw alchemy as a form of hermetic pedagogy, this path of initiation and self-discovery.
Okay.
He saw it as a metaphor for the search for meaning, this journey through darkness and transformation to a higher understanding of ourselves and the world.
Wow. It's incredible to think about all those layers of symbolism and meaning embedded in art.
Yeah.
That might seem, abstract or obscure at first glance. It makes you want to go back and look at these works with fresh eyes.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you say?
Totally. And that's what's so beautiful about exploring art through this lens of spirituality. Mm-hmm. It invites us to look beyond the surface, to engage with it on a much deeper, more intuitive level.
Right.
Art can be this really powerful tool for exploring our own, inner landscapes, our own spiritual journeys.
I couldn't agree more, but before we lose ourselves completely in alchemical symbols, I think we should shift our focus to the present day.
Okay.
Can contemporary art still engage with spirituality in a meaningful way?
That's a great question, and it's one that James Elkins explores in his book on the strange place of religion in contemporary art. And he points out this perceived disconnect between spirituality and a lot of contemporary art.
Yeah.
There seems to be this reluctance, this hesitation to engage with spiritual themes in today's art world.
So are we seeing like a secularization of art, like the shift away from the transcendent or the mystical? What do you think?
It's a complex issue with arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
However, there are definitely still artists who are wrestling with these spiritual questions in their work.
Okay.
One powerful example is Bill Viola.
Bill Viola's video installations are truly mesmerizing.
Oh, yeah.
How would you say his work connects to the spiritual?
Well, he's spoken about his connection to the via negativa, this mystical path that emphasizes the importance of unknowing, of doubt, of embracing the mystery of existence. And he sees these states of not knowing as crucial to his creative process.
So it's not about finding concrete answers, but about creating a space for contemplation, wrestling with the unknown.
Exactly. And this ties into Stanislav Grof's concern that the loss of the spiritual perspective is a root cause of this global crisis that we're facing.
Right.
He argues that a culture that denies or suppresses spirituality is ultimately unsustainable.
It's something to think about.
It is.
It's a sobering thought, but I think it also highlights the importance of exploring the spiritual dimensions of art, both past and present.
Yeah.
It really does feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface here.
We have. We've only just begun. Picking up where we left off, it seems like we've kind of stumbled upon a bit of a paradox.
I do love a good paradox when it comes to art. What do we got?
Well, on one hand, we've got this idea of a spiritual revolution, like people are really hungry for a sense of re-enchantment, for meaning beyond just the material world.
Right.
But at the same time, there's this resistance to explicitly religious or spiritual themes in contemporary art.
So it's like the spiritual longing, but also a fear of seeming too sentimental or overtly religious in art.
Exactly. James Elkins talks about this, strange place that religion seems to occupy in the contemporary art world. It's as if there's this suspicion that overt spirituality somehow compromises the intellectual or artistic integrity of the work.
Yeah, it's like this cultural hangover, this idea that serious art needs to keep its distance from anything that feels like faith or belief.
Right.
You think that's a fair assessment?
I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
You can see how this tension plays out in the way that a lot of artists, even those who are personally spiritual,
Right.
they avoid using overtly religious imagery or language in their work.
So they might use metaphor or create spaces for contemplation rather than making like direct statements about faith or belief.
Precisely. And it's interesting to contrast this with earlier artists like Kandinsky or Mondrian, who are much more comfortable weaving their spiritual beliefs directly into their art.
But even then there was pushback, right? We talked about how Kandinsky's connection to theosophy was actually used against him by critics.
That's right. And I think that historical context helps us understand why some people are still uneasy about this connection between art and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
There's this lingering fear that spirituality somehow contaminates art, makes it less intellectual,
But isn't that a pretty limited view of both art and spirituality? I mean, throughout history, some of the most profound and challenging works of art have deep roots in spiritual and religious tradition.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating.
Yeah.
We're grappling with these really fundamental questions about the nature of art, the role of spirituality in our lives,
Right.
and how these two realms interact.
Yeah, it feels like a conversation that goes way beyond just the art world.
Definitely. We're talking about the human search for meaning, for connection,
Yeah. Yeah.
for something that transcends our everyday experience, and art in all its forms has always been a powerful way to explore those deeper dimensions.
Mm-hmm. And as we move deeper into the 21st century, it feels like this exploration is becoming even more urgent.
I agree. We live in a world that's, increasingly fragmented and disillusioned.
Yeah.
And art, with its ability to awaken our senses, to challenge our assumptions, and to connect us to something larger, I think it has a vital role to play in helping us navigate these times.
But how do we get past the skepticism and the anxieties that still surround this topic?
Yeah.
How do we create space for a more open dialogue about the spiritual side of art?
That's the big question, and there's no easy answer. But I think it begins with recognizing that spirituality in its broadest sense is a fundamental part of being human.
It's that inherent desire for connection, for meaning, for something more.
Exactly.
And art has always been this powerful language for expressing those desires and for exploring those mysteries.
Right. And if we can move past this fear of seeming too sentimental or too religious,
Yeah.
I think we can open ourselves up to a whole new world of artistic expression and spiritual exploration.
It's not about expecting art to give us concrete answers about faith or belief.
Right.
It's about appreciating how art can create spaces for contemplation, for wrestling with the unknown.
And in a world that's so focused on certainty and measurable outcomes,
Yeah.
I think those spaces for contemplation and uncertainty are more valuable than ever.
Absolutely. It's not about rejecting reason or science. It's about recognizing that there are other ways of knowing, other ways of experiencing the world.
Exactly. It's about embracing the mystery, the ambiguity, the possibility that there might be more to reality than what we can see and measure.
Yeah.
How do you think art helps us do that?
I think artists, with their sensitivity to human experience and their ability to see the world in these fresh ways, they have a really vital role to play here.
They can help us reconnect with that sense of wonder that's often missing in our lives.
They can challenge us to look beyond the surface of things, to explore the hidden dimensions of reality.
To tap into the power of myth and symbol.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they can remind us that we're not alone in this search for meaning. That there's this long history of artists and thinkers who have grappled with these same questions.
It's a legacy worth celebrating and exploring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we continue, it's important to remember that this conversation about art and spirituality isn't static.
Right.
It's an ongoing process of discovery, of dialogue, of pushing boundaries.
And who knows what new forms of artistic expression and spiritual exploration will emerge in the years to come. That's what's so exciting about this whole field.
Exactly. It's a realm of infinite possibilities, wouldn't you say?
I completely agree. It's full of potential. Like what David Tacey suggests is fascinating. If God is truly active in the world, we might start to see that divine creativity reflected in the art of the 21st century in ways we can't even imagine yet.
It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it? The idea that art can be this conduit for the divine, the window into the transcendent.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get too carried away, it's important to acknowledge that we've only just scratched the surface of this conversation,
There's so much more to explore, so many different viewpoints to consider.
And I really encourage you to continue this journey of discovery, to seek out artists and works that resonate with you on that deep spiritual level.
Because ultimately, the relationship between art and spirituality is a deeply personal one.
It's about finding your own path, your own way of connecting with the sacred, your own way of making meaning in a world that can often feel meaningless.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover your own inner artist along the way.
Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful outcome? But for now, let's move to the final part of our deep dive and see what other insights we can uncover together.
It's amazing to me, how this whole idea of the spiritual has really changed over time.
Yeah.
It's not just about, traditional religion anymore. It's
Right.
become something so much broader and more personal and nuanced.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's fascinating how that shift is reflected in our relationship with art.
Mhm.
There's this growing understanding that art can be like a pathway to a kind of spirituality that's not bound by any specific doctrines or dogmas.
Yeah, it goes back to that sense of awe and wonder that we were talking about. That feeling of connection to something larger than ourselves.
Right.
That yearning for meaning and purpose that we see in so much of the source material.
Yeah.
Do you think that really resonates with people today?
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of what draws people to art in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It offers us a space for contemplation, for reflection,
Yeah.
for grappling with those big questions about life and death and everything in between.
It's like art gives us a language for those parts of human experience that are really hard to put into words.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt that way?
I think we all have at some point. And I think that's why it's so important to resist the temptation to reduce art to just its aesthetic or technical qualities.
Yeah.
We have to be open to the possibility that it can also speak to our souls, our spirits,
Right.
those deeper parts of ourselves that crave connection and transcendence.
And that's where I think this idea of the artist as a modern-day shaman becomes so powerful. The shaman, in many cultures, is seen as this bridge between the human and the divine.
Right.
This conduit for spiritual energy. It's a powerful archetype.
It is. And in a way, artists can kind of fulfill a similar role. They can help us to see the world with new eyes.
To tap into the power of myth and symbol.
Exactly. To connect with those primal energies that often lie hidden beneath the surface of our everyday lives.
And it's about recognizing that art can be a transformative experience. Not just for the artist,
Right.
but for anyone who engages with it.
Exactly.
It can challenge our assumptions, expand our understanding of ourselves in the world,
Yeah.
and reconnect us with that sense of wonder that we can so easily lose in our daily lives.
Right.
What do you think are some of the ways that art does this?
Well, I think it's crucial to create spaces where people can really encounter art in a way that allows for that kind of transformative experience.
Okay.
Spaces that encourage contemplation and reflection and dialogue. Spaces that are open to the possibility that art can speak to us on multiple levels, including the spiritual.
And I think that's what's so exciting about what we're seeing in the art world today.
Yeah.
There's this growing awareness of the spiritual dimensions of art.
Right.
And a real willingness to explore those dimensions in new and innovative ways.
Yeah.
As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, this exploration just feels more important than ever.
It does. We need art that helps us make sense of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find meaning amidst all the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And connect with those deeper sources of wisdom and inspiration that can guide us through these really turbulent times.
How do you think we as viewers can approach art in a way that allows for that kind of connection?
I think it starts with curiosity and a willingness to be open to the unexpected. Art speaks to us in its own language, often through symbol and metaphor and feeling.
Right.
If we can kind of quiet our minds and allow ourselves to be fully present with the work, we might be surprised by what we discover.
I love that. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. If you're feeling a sense of spiritual longing, that desire for something more, don't underestimate the power of art to guide you on that journey.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking out those moments of awe and wonder that remind us of the beauty and the mystery of existence. Art can be a powerful companion on that journey.
Beautifully put. And as always, we encourage you to delve deeper into the sources that we've explored today.
Yes.
You'll find links to all of them in the show notes.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those spirits ignited.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another exploration into this fascinating world of ideas.